Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our last panel of the conference. The panel is entitled, it's the academic panel of the COL-IS. It is entitled Blended Learning, Creating or Promoting Effective Tech-Supported Teaching Learning Spaces. I'll start off with introducing our panelists. I'm Christine Sabier, and I am the new COL-IS leader, chair, I don't know what I'm called. Anyway, within an hour. I've been active with the COL-IS for a number of years, and we're excited that it is the end of the conference and planning for the next one. And we hope to see you all there. Justin Schul is one of the backbones of the COL-IS. Actually, we wouldn't be able to function without him. And he is an online education developer for Arizona State University. He holds a PhD in educational technology and a master's in TESOL. He's a teacher trainer and an instructional designer. He co-designed Teach English Now, the world's largest online TESOL certificate program, which won the Learner's First Award for Coursera. As I said, he is one of the backbones, and we are very happy to have him on our panel. Our next speaker is Dawn Bukowski, also an active COL-ISer, and she is with us, and again, we are very happy to have her on our panel. She is the director of the ELIP, Academic and Communication Program in the Department of Linguistics. Where? Ohio University, sorry. In addition to being program director, she teaches linguistics graduate coursework in pedagogical grammar and second language reading and writing. Our fourth speaker is George Kornpass, and he also has been a COL-IS member for a few years and participated in a few panels. He is an English instructor at Interlink at Al Yamana University in Saudi Arabia, and he has also been elected to be a new member on the steering committee in the next few hours, right? Within the next few hours, you will start your new duties. Our last speaker is Randall Davis, and Randall Davis is currently at a poster session, but he will be joining us hopefully by the time he is supposed to speak. Randall Davis is currently teaching at the English Language Institute at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, and again, he has been a COL-IS member for the past few years. Without further ado, let us start. The purpose of this panel is to share content, methodology, activities, tools, and assessment, different components that one has to consider in a blended learning environment. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a bit of theory, and then we're going to move it towards the practical perspective so that we better understand what happens in a blended learning setup. At times we call it hybrid, at times we call it blended, but what we need to understand is that when we're blending, we're mixing, we're combining, we are customizing to make things happen in a teaching learning environment. When we talk about it in terms of theory, they talk about the theory of connectivity, so there's some debate, yes, no on that, but the whole idea is, what are we combining? Are we combining pedagogies? Are we combining technology-based learning with traditional-based learning? Are we mixing different instructional methodologies at one time with instructional technologies? So it's basically up to us to decide how we integrate the idea of blended learning in a real-world situation. And if we take our classrooms to be real world, how do we bring in activities that become real world to engage our students? How do we do the mixes? How do we do the methodology mixes? How do we do the activities? So it's up to us how we customize our blended learning environment. But whatever model we choose to adopt, whatever strategies we choose to reinforce, we need to realize that certain models that deal with skills, aptitude, competencies, the idea of flex, the idea of a la carte, enriching the virtual setup, getting students to become more engaged, self-regulated in their learning, yet working with other students, working with their teachers at the same time, allowing the students to become more responsible in their learning, all becomes part of the goal setting as educators in planning their, their courses or the course outcomes. So we need to understand that when we try to define blended learning, we are looking at ways of customizing the teaching learning environment to promote the belief that blended learning is something effective for us to integrate into our classroom setups. But as I said, it is a mix, but there must be a direction. So it is up to us to define the direction before we start the planning, and then we plan keeping the learning outcomes in mind. So components to consider would be, and you're going to see this during our panel as it develops, content, material, technology, what kind of technology do we have at our hand, what kind of context are we dealing with, whether it's online, whether it's physical, a mix of physical and online, what kind of delivery methods, what kind of collaborative activities can we have, and what do we talk about when we talk about assessment. So the players basically are educators and students, and we are defining roles, and we need to ensure that the roles are clearly defined to ensure that we involve our students as much as possible, we engage them, but we make them responsible as being part of the teaching learning setup. So what will happen in the panel is that content specifically will be discussed by me and Justin. Instructional methodology will be addressed by Dawn. Randall will showcase some activities. Justin will once again take the podium and talk about tools and instructional context, and George will be discussing assessment. And then we'll have discussion at the end. So basically, what my part will be is the idea of using OER in the context of blended learning. The idea is, we had a whole panel yesterday on this, but just to reiterate some of the points to show that using OER materials can be put into a blended learning environment. The idea is many institutions are involving OER into their setups, whether as courses or as materials. So we need to understand what is OER and how can OER be brought into a blended learning setup. Simply put, teaching and learning materials are available free. But if you notice, I put the word free between quotes because it is not necessarily free as in what we would want to think of free. We need to be aware that sometimes you do take material off a web, but that does not necessarily mean it is open resource and licensed by the Creative Commons, but that doesn't mean you cannot use it in a blended environment. So as I said, whatever it is that you are choosing to use based on OER is to be used, customized in relation to how you plan to have your teaching learning set up based on the focus you plan to undertake. So just to say that the value of OER based on the licenses allows us to use and reuse the material, allows us to use the material, modify the material, change it or edit it, allows us to create it and then share it, create it, share it, and use it. The idea is creating resources that become easy for others to also partake in and use. One example, I am using a textbook for my educational psychology class. I found it to be very useful, but a lot of the material in the textbook is not needed for the environment that I teach in. I teach at a university level. I teach educational psychology at an undergraduate and a graduate level, and in the two scenarios, well, this textbook I'm using at the undergraduate level, but I teach in Lebanon. Although the language of instruction is in English, I'm teaching students that are going to become teachers in a Lebanese context or in a Middle Eastern context. So there's a lot of parts of the book that I don't even address. And actually, I use the book as a stepping stone, and I add material to it. So I have a lot of YouTube material that I take out, other references, journal articles, etc. And then I also use the textbook when I also want, to allude to certain theories there. I also use search engines. So you have a lot of search engines and websites. I've just identified that you could start off with the Google Advanced Search. It's very easy to look at things and find things there. YouTube, Flickr image search, etc., etc. So you just need to get onto the website and search. Using OER, between quotes, you could put that in and you can find a lot of material. You also have a lot of OER repositories that you can look at. And as I said, there's OER and there's OAR, which means open access resource. So it depends on what it is that you would like to put into your environment, but you have a lot of resources out there that could be used. So when we're thinking of uploading material that is available for us, we need to think, are we using this material in a physical space, or are we using it in the part of the space which is online, which is not necessarily, the two don't have to necessarily go together. So it's, again, as you customize your medium. Basically, I've mentioned everything. Also, another thing I didn't mention, our platform, our learning management system is Blackboard, and it's very easy to create blended learning environments with the assistance of a Blackboard. Okay? So my recommendation would be, yes, there's a lot of material out there, but we need to make sure that the material gets customized to be used in a way that fit the learning outcomes that we have planned for our students. It's available, it's free, and it's easy to access. The content material is rich, especially the media-based material. There's a lot of content that is out there that is relevant. But again, it's up to you to ensure that it is. We are trying to promote digital literacy, so we need to make sure that our students are able to acquire that digital literacy with the skills that they basically have. So the idea of promoting learning in a more efficient manner becomes very important when we are considering materials. And I'm going to turn over to Justin. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Do I need to hold it closer? Is that better? Okay. So I was at a conference, the Coursera Partners Conference at the beginning of March, and one of the designers there said something that was really obvious but also really profound. He said, in an online environment, if your students don't like you, they just turn you off. And I realized that even in a blended learning environment, if your students aren't being held accountable for what they're being asked to do outside of the classroom, they'll just turn you off, or they just won't watch it. And so one of the things I wanted to focus on was the idea of creating engaging content. And so it's not so much technology-based as more just kind of general pedagogical principles, but that's what I'm going to focus on. So this is a clip from Karate Kid. A lot of us maybe have seen this movie or the newer version. I think of Mr. Miyagi, and when I was young, he was like the ultimate teacher. I wanted to be like him. And so I'll play this clip for you.
Inning.
I'm what? I'm being your slave is what I'm being, man. Now, we made a deal here.
So?
So you're supposed to teach and I'm supposed to learn, remember? For 4 days, I've been busting my ass. I haven't learned a thing.
You learned plenty.
I learned plenty. I learned how to sand your decks, maybe. I wax your car, paint your house, paint your fence. I learned plenty, right?
Not everything is as simple.
Oh, I'm going home, man.
So what's the problem here? The problem here is Mr. Miyagi is teaching, and Daniel is learning something, but Daniel doesn't know what he's learning, right?
Inning.
So Daniel doesn't understand the relevance of what he's doing. He wanted to learn karate, not learn how to wash cars and wax floors and everything else. And in blended learning and online learning in general, if your students don't understand why the content is relevant, they'll turn it off. They won't pay attention, and they won't get what they're supposed to be getting when you're not there looking over their shoulder. So one of the things that I think is really important is making your content relevant and letting them know what the relevance is ahead of time. One way to do that is to create real-world problems for the students to solve. When I was in high school, I went all the way up to calculus as a senior. You know, that was the highest I could go in math. And I did okay, I got B's. 1 year later, I went to go take a college entrance test in math to place, and I placed below college algebra. So I'd forgotten everything from 4 years of math in high school in 1 year. I remember one thing from my math class, and that from my algebra class, and that was when the teacher brought in a problem that required algebra to solve, and it was his next door neighbor wanted to build a ramp for his boat trailer, and he wanted to know what angle he should build the ramp at so that when he backed the trailer down, it wouldn't scrape. It's the only thing I remember from 4 years of math because it was a real world problem, which to me it seemed relevant. You know, math was then applicable. I don't remember how we solved the problem though. I just remember the problem. So this is an example of a real world problem I use with my students. In Tempe, where I work at Arizona State University, so we have University Avenue and College Street. And the intersection it seems like 24 hours, it's just busy, and especially during like the rush hour times. And you know, if you're trying to go from one end of University Avenue to the other, it can take you 20, 30 minutes to go, you know, 1.5 miles. And so what I did was, I've done this 2 ways actually. I have a video of the intersection sped up. So it's an hour worth of traffic sped up into about 5 minutes that the students have to watch. Or I've had them stand there on the intersection and the corner for an hour and observe. So I've done it both ways. But I asked them to watch the video and observe and try to figure out what the problem is. Why is there so much traffic? And then come up with possible solutions that they can then bring to class that we can then talk about. So I could take them out there during class time and have them observe, and you know, I'm watching them, making sure that they're doing it. But by doing it this way, I get to have them do the mundane stuff outside of class, and the discussion and the interaction and the use of language we get to do inside of class. And then I have them write an essay about their problem and what they would do. And sometimes I have them write a letter to the city council. And so I try to make it as real world and authentic as they can. And they understand the relevance of it because they've all had to sit in that traffic going from one end of University Avenue to the other. By the way, I have 5 kids, so these are kids' movies usually. But
You are a bad person.
If you can talk, you can teach. Wayfinding. Ugh. Lesson 1. Hit it.
Pull the sheet. Not the sheet. Nope. 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 No. Tried that one already.
so what's the problem here? There's no structure, right? He said, pull the sheet. I'm thinking bed sheet. And she doesn't know what the sheet is either, and she's going around. And how long would it take her to learn what the sheet is and to discover it? It might take a little bit. It might take, you know, a longer time. But you need to make sure that you're providing the appropriate structure for the students. Otherwise, they're going to take a lot longer to complete the activities, and they may give up halfway through. They may not get as much out of it. You have students at different levels, so you might have to actually provide different varying levels of structure, or make some parts of an assignment optional for students that maybe don't need it. But without that structure, students are not going to be able to accomplish their learning objectives.
What is their story, by the way?
Sir?
What is their story?
Why, they're from West Africa.
No. What is their story? Mrs. Jolson, you're from where originally?
Why, Georgia, sir.
Georgia.
Yes, sir.
Does that pretty much sum up what you are? A Georgian? Is that your story? No. You're an ex-slave who's devoted his life to the abolition of slavery and overcoming great obstacles and hardships along the way, I should imagine. That's your story, isn't it? You and this young so-called lawyer have proven you know what they are. They're Africans. Congratulations. What you don't know, and as far as I can tell, haven't bothered in the least to discover, is who they are. Right?
So this is from the movie Amistad, and he's trying to get to know these slaves that he's representing in court. And I love this clip because to me it's kind of the same. You can't teach students that you don't know. And when we started, when I started designing massive open online courses, one of the recommendations that was made was to create learner stories, to think about a specific learner. You know, we had Maria in South America and Jose in Mexico or wherever we were designing for, and we'd think about what background would they have, what different characteristics would they have, what technology expertise would they have, and we'd kind of create this learner story, and then we would use those characteristics to guide us as we were designing. So you need to make sure that as you're preparing your content for your blended learning context, that you're meeting individual student needs. Some students are going to learn faster than others, like I said before, making some parts of an activity optional. I create what I call pre-training modules to make sure that if they go through all those little pre-training pieces, they'll have all the background knowledge they need to understand the activity, but maybe I don't grade those parts or I make them optional pieces because they might not need those, right? And then designing the content to be flexible in a way that the students can access it at their level. Despite how cute it was, is that you need to help your students set goals. Without goals, students aren't going to have a path to progress along, and they're going to become passive. I want my students to take an active role in their learning, so often I will work with them to set goals about things that they want to learn, and then I always go back and take the goals that they've set and I tie it back to the things that we're doing in class and the things that I'm asking them to do online. So I always get I teach a listening speaking class at Arizona State University, and the students in my class are going to be going up probably in like less than a semester to take regular, university level classes. And we talk about taking notes and how they're going to have to listen to a lecture, and then in 2 months they're going to have to take a midterm exam on a lecture that they heard 2 months ago, and how do they remember that kind of stuff. And we talk about that, and their eyes get big, and all of a sudden they're very engaged, and because now I've scared them. And but that's one of the goals that they said, is to be able to attend a university level class. And so I apply that and help them to use those goals to see the relevance of the content. So, and the goals help students also to be able to track their progress and know how they're moving along, which is also very motivating. And where's Christine? Oh, Dawn is next.
Hi, I'm Dawn Bukowski, and I will be talking specifically about a way that we implement blended learning into a specific course that we have. And I'll be focusing on how we are using the blended learning environment to help students build their autonomy. And so I will say a few things about the program that I direct and the class, just so you get a sense of the context for this, and then give some overall ideas how you might apply this in your own teaching. I direct the ELIP Academic and Global Communication Program. We are a program for both international and domestic students. We have graduate as well as undergraduate coursework where students are fully matriculated into the university. So when I show the example of the course that I'm going to demonstrate today, you'll see it's thesis, dissertation, writing course, and this is for students who are international, domestic, quite advanced. We also have a number of other services that we offer online as well for students, including online tutoring and such, in order to support them in online and also in blended learning. So I'll talk about how we use the blended learning model specifically in 3 different ways for students. Student-centered levels and needs, so that the content is student-centered at that levels and needs kind of component, as well as the content being student-centered according to their discipline, and also within their discipline, the specific assignments or topics that they are working on. The class, as I mentioned, is a thesis and dissertation class, or any type of research, writing for research in the sciences. And you can see the course overview there. Basically, students are choosing an assignment that they need to write up in their academic universe anyway, and they are bringing that into our course. So the topic is of their own choosing, and it needs to be related to their specific field. So in this case, you can imagine there needs to be quite a bit of flexibility in terms of content, because you could have chemistry, physics, math students, health sciences students all together in the same course. And so some of the content will be similar, and some of the content will be quite different. If you're interested in how the model works, our university wrote up an article, and you can kind of Google for those terms, or I put the URL on the bottom so that you can read a little bit more specifically on how the course works, since we kind of have a limited time today. But the students themselves have noticed that blended learning is allowing them to focus on their specific needs. And as Justin mentioned, we want to be pulling students into our course, engaging them, and making them feel like the material is relevant to their lives. So students have made comments, these are from the course evaluations, about the focus on the student. One of the students wrote that. The second one, in a regular face-to-face class, everyone has to study everything together, whether you need it or not, right? Whether they need it or not. But in my hybrid class, I can suggest specific models, and this comes from the teacher, and topics for students based on their projects and interests, and students still get to work together. So blended learning, for our context, makes this more possible. So how do we do that? We have half of our class sessions are in class, and then half of our overall class sessions are only online. So students don't meet face-to-face during those half the time. We choose topics for our in-class sessions that are likely to be more general and applicable to all the students in the course. And we apply this model to several other courses that we have within the program. So topics that are more general for everyone, we have minimal lecturing. We might do a little mini lecture. Instead, in class, they are doing tasks, analyses, discussions, peer feedback, conferences, things like that. As an example, here's a sample in-class lesson. We ask students to, for instance, everyone bring a results section from a piece of writing, or bring your own results section that you are currently working on. They create their own corpus of articles within their field. If it's not a thesis and dissertation class, we have them create other types of their own corpora. And they're going to go back in class, and we teach them how to look within the articles they found to find specific features of language use or organization and content that they can apply then in what they are writing. So how do people in my field write this stuff up? How can I learn to do that myself? So in-class analysis and training. content and then language both are focused on. Even though we have a number of domestic students, you know, as we all realize, academic English isn't something we're necessarily all fluent in when we first start graduate school. So the content is similar in terms of the needs of the students, even though we have the international and domestic students. And then for the online sessions, we choose topics that are more going to depend on what the students might need within their own field, or some students need more help with content and organization. Other students need more help with their language use in general. So we might ask students to, for instance, we might have a module they could choose, maybe choose a couple, and one of them is samples of figures, tables, and illustrations. So the modules, the way we would run that is the materials we have are, for each option we have videos. We also frequently do live sessions, but we record them so students can choose to attend a live session during our blended week, or they can just watch the recording later. And then we have readings and blogs. And we'll do activities. We still want them to be doing activities where they also need to implement some of those analytical skills that we've taught them in class, and ask them to focus then on their own specific topic. So to kind of go back and try reviewing those skills again. And then we ensure an accountability option for each of those sessions too. We don't just want our students to turn us off, so we ask them to do something for that week. So we might ask them, for instance, one of them is within a Google Doc or spreadsheet, we ask students to share their findings. So I found this when I analyzed the tables or figures from my field. Here's what I found in my field, and they add that information to the Google Doc, and that's shared with the rest of their classmates who appreciate knowing how other fields handle these things. And at the same time, the teacher can go back through later and point out some of the similarities that are across different fields, even if there are some minor variations, but kind of the overall similarities that occur. We're working toward having what I call a modified adaptive learning model. If you are familiar with adaptive learning at all, it is the idea that it's an online educational system that modifies the presentation of material in response to student performance. Usually this model is used with large classes, perhaps with something like mathematics, large online classes, and they are usually heavily quiz and test based. So students take multiple choice questions, and then the content shifts that they are exposed to, that they have access to, shifts depending on the answers that they provide to their multiple choice. But in our modified version that we're creating, we still have the first point, which is that it provides the next lesson at the right level of difficulty at the right time. But we're modifying it in having students have a little bit more choice in what those options are. Like I mentioned earlier, some students can have very different needs with writing, as we all know, whether they're in an IEP or in university classes. A lot of people need writing, but they need very different support for that writing. So providing students with an assessment and also a self-reflective piece where they identify their goals, and then the content can be released to them in a way that meets their goals at that time, what they need. That gives students more control over their learning, almost kind of a choose-your-own adventure type learning model. So that's what we're working toward for our blended courses. Okay, that's it.
Hello, my name's Randall Davis, and I'm happy to be here with you today. And someone asked me in the Electronic Village how many times I've presented in the Electronic Village, and actually the first time that I presented was in that venue in 1998. That was in Seattle. I don't know if any of you were there, but over time, I think I've realized that true wisdom is knowing that you know nothing. And I share that because as we talk about blended learning, as we talk about technology in general, and as Don and as Justin brought up, there are many things that need to be considered, creating a framework on how things evolve and work. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you actually a little blended teaching model using a back-channeling service called Today's Meet. And as we begin to think about blended learning, often we think about typical models, that everything fits into a typical model. The reality is that life does not. And when I think about blended learning and classrooms, if I ask people, okay, typical blended models, what classrooms does it work best in? Students of 10, 15, 20. If I were to ask some of you, you might work in classrooms of 60, 80, 100. So keeping that in mind, that there is no real typical model of how blended learning works, can be really important because we need to keep in mind the challenges that are presented to us. So one of the things that I'm thinking about, what is one thing I could share with you today that might work in 90% of your classrooms? Not requiring really any special technology, but something that could be integrated, that could be done to help you in your teaching. And so one of the things I'd like to share with you, again, whether it works with 5 students, 50 students, 100 students, some type of technique, building upon what Don and Justin have always shared already about establishing goals, about understanding the needs of students and so forth. The other thing is, what I want to think is as you begin at blended learning, sometimes the electronic village and the whole Cal intersection has really been built on the concept of helping everyone, no matter where you find yourself within the profession. So some of the times you can think big, but often take it small. And the idea of shoot for the moon, but maybe start with a bottle rocket. Just come up with a simple concept that could be transferred from you to your students to other colleagues that you work with. So one of the things I'd like to share with you is just some ideas. Here's a classroom situation that your students are working on a grammar assignment. You have maybe 20, 30 students in a classroom, but I don't know if you ever felt this way when you were in a classroom and a teacher told you, go ahead and write your answers on the board. When I was in high school studying Spanish, I can remember the year was 1978. I was in high school taking Spanish, not because I wanted to, because my mom wanted me to take Spanish. And when I wrote something on the board, of course, everyone could see my mistakes. And I was paralyzed by that idea. So is there any way that we can create a learning environment where students can actually share their ideas on a particular grammar task, for example, integrating technology, but yet allows them to share in such a way that preserves their anonymity as well? So what I'd like to share with you is a service called Today's Meet. Some of you probably are aware of this. It's a back-channeling service. It's kind of like an old-fashioned chat room that doesn't require a whole lot to run. Basically, you can combine this with both face-to-face learning within the classroom, but there are other activities that you can accomplish outside of the classroom. I'll share that in a minute. So basically, let me give you a scenario. You're working with students on helping them use the simple present tense, talking about sports activities, using the verbs play, go, and do. Also, they're working with time expressions like on Tuesdays, every week, on Fridays, and so forth. But you want them to be able to use their maybe portable device, maybe, and again, we're assuming that not all students will have a portable device, but let's say that students are working in groups of 2 or 3 students, if that is the case. And when you go into Today's Meet, basically, it's a free service. Students, once they go in, you as the teacher can actually, and let me go to this slide first, you create a room for the students. And the room only lasts as long as you want it to last. In other words, you can set up the room, and I selected for this particular presentation the title Grammar 100. You can have the room set up and appear for 1 hour, 2 hours, and then it will disappear. Then what students, once they get into it, they would type a nickname. They can use any name. Sometimes students ask me, Randall, can I use your name? Well, that's okay. You can use anything. They will type in their nickname, and then after they type in their nickname, then they will type in the message, whatever grammar prompt I wanted them to follow. In other words, if I asked them to combine, talk a little bit about their daily or weekly sports activities, and they're practicing go, do, go, do, and play. A student might say, here's another example, just using the simple present tense outside of that. It says, my sister study English every day. So as students are typing in their messages, they appear on the screen. Let me go on to the next one. They appear on the screen, and all of the students will appear up there. You will see their nicknames, but you'll see all of their responses to what you've shared with them. And let me give you some pedagogical uses as we talk about this. So how does that work? Again, you set up the room. You decide on what name you're going to give it. You decide on how long you want it to be used, and then you select their usernames. And this is what it would look like. So as I give the students prompts to type in, they will type them in, they will show up on the screen, and then I, as the teacher, will walk up to the screen and make edits to whatever grammar prompt or mistakes that I want to address to them. Well, what about the classroom preparation that I kind of alluded to in the past, a few minutes ago? Number one, as the teacher logs in, you can also create a QR code for that particular room so that instead of the student typing in the long URL, which is todaysmeet.com/whatever the room is named, they can actually type in the URL or the QR code there. And here was the actual thing that I was trying to encourage the student. They would come up with sentences using do, play, or go. They can use simple present tense, what is my focus? They can use WH questions, which is often hard for students to do. They can use anything. And so as they type in their sentences on the board, they will appear, and then teachers can correct them. Well, what are some other things that we could do with this? Well, students can work in pairs. Let's say that not every student has a device, so they can work in pairs to type in their sentences. Also, what they can do is, point number 3, the teacher can correct as many items on the board as possible. What you can do is you can also leave that room on for longer. Let's say that you select that the room will stay open for 3 hours or 4 hours or a day. And then later in the evening, based on what students do in the class, you can ask them to go home and type an additional sentence, extending that learning outside of the class at home. You can copy the transcript if you want to, and the students can do that as well. And then often students, as teachers are typing in answers or giving examples in the class, students might say, well, I'd like to have some of those examples for my own study. Again, leaving that room open a little bit longer can allow the student to capture those at home on their computer or on their smartphone. So one of the things, what would be the learner's outcome? Well, my learner outcome in this particular case was to help students, again, in this particular case, work on prompts, writing prompts, using the simple present tense. Also, what you can do is students can extend that a little bit further in speaking activities in the class. Let's say they work at first on writing within the class, but then you ask them to talk about their sentences as well. And then another caveat is that you might help students learn about rising and falling intonation using this particular service as well. Well, as you think about today's meet and any type of task that you might be using with blended learning, the reason why I like today's meet is it's something that can combine a very simple technology, something that is very easy to use, can be used with their smartphones, doesn't require any really special login on your part, but allow that you take what you're wanting to do in the class, project it on the screen for their learning within the class, and then extending that outside of the class in terms of extra exercises. Some teachers, what they'll do as well is they'll keep the room open longer for online consulting hours. So if you decide that you tell students my consulting hours are a little bit longer this afternoon, they can log back into that same area using that same name for that particular room, and then you can provide additional feedback and help to them. I'd like to share with you just a couple of small last ideas. Whether you use today's Meet or any other service to combine some blended learning in your class, my thought is always the same, is trying to keep things very, very simple. Sometimes I think that the ideas that we might be sharing at conferences might be very overwhelming for teachers, especially in very demanding learning environments. And the other thing is that blended learning can take on many, many textures. Just because maybe your particular task that you're doing is not fine mashed potatoes, but has a little lumps in it, maybe that's how we should approach things, is to allow blended learning to take many shapes in whatever we do. Thank you very much.
Christine wanted me to remind everyone that this is being webcast, so the recording with all the slides and everything will actually be available on YouTube later on. And you can go to our callis.org, call-is.org website for the link to the webcast page, which will have the recording links. So Christine also asked if we could talk about some tools that you can use for developing content and tools that work in blended learning. And so there are actually so many out there, and I chose 4 that I wanted to focus on that I thought would work in a large variety of contexts. Most of them involve video because that's kind of what I do in my classes, is a lot of video. But the first one is Google Classroom. If you've never used Google Classroom before, it's a great little LMS. I say little, Google's not little, but you know, most universities, for example, don't use Google Classroom because there are more expensive and maybe some better options out there, I guess, if you're willing to pay for them. But Google Classroom is great because it's free, generally free. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I like Google Classroom, especially if I have to create the LMS or the class myself, because it really integrates easily with Google Docs. And all my students have Google accounts, and so if they want to turn in an assignment, they can submit a Google Doc to me. They don't have to download it as a Word doc and upload it into Blackboard or do whatever. I can send assignments out to them, and it gets posted into their Google accounts and their emails. I can do quizzes with Google Forms that then can be graded through Google Classroom. So it's very intuitive, and it's great. It integrates really well with the other Google apps in the Google Suite. When I say it's free, so in order to set up Google Classroom, you have to have a domain, first of all, and domains are not free. You have to register a domain, and it has to be an educational-based domain. You might be able to do it with a .org, but I think it has to be like a .edu type domain. And so a teacher at a school wouldn't be able to just go and set up Google Classroom themselves. The technology person for their school that runs their website or whatever would have to help them with that, because they might not have access to the domain. I saw a hand. Okay. I haven't used it for a long.
Can you repeat what she said, Justin?
So we have a comment from the live audience here that Google Classroom no longer requires a domain, that you can actually just use it with a Gmail account. And I haven't done that, so thank you. So it can't be used, it has to be used with a Gmail, like a personal, an actual Gmail account. So it's even more free than before, because domain registration costs money, but when I used to do teacher training with students in Peru, they loved Google Classroom, and then they would go down and talk to their school about trying to get it set up, and their school would be like, oh, we have to create a domain? That's so hard. And so I'm glad that they've changed that. Another one that I like is Screencastify. I don't know if you guys have used this one before. This is, it allows you to capture your computer screen in, in a video, a screenshot, or a screencast, I guess we call it. And this one is, it's an app, or sorry, an extension that works in Google Chrome. So anything that you're doing in Google Chrome, it can capture, and then it saves as a video. And it automatically will save those videos to your Google Drive or even to YouTube, I believe. And so it's nice because it's non-computer specific. If you can run Chrome on that computer, you should be able to use Screencastify. So it's great if you're having to go back and forth between Macs and Windows and things like that. There is a paid version, and the paid version allows you to create videos that are longer than 10 minutes, and it also allows you to clip videos so you can cut them up into different clips. With the free version, I think 10 minutes is your max, and you can't really edit the videos after you've recorded them. 10 minutes for me is not a problem because research shows that most students aren't willing to watch something that's longer than 10 minutes. So, I actually used to use Jing with teachers, and Jing, the free version, limits you to 5 minutes, and then the teachers, they have to really think about what they want to say and plan it out because they only get 5 minutes, and so I actually like that time limit. Another one is TED Ed at ted.ted.com. So you guys know what TED is, the TED Talks. EdTED allows you to take those videos of TED Talks and actually any YouTube video and to create quizzes and discussion boards and lessons around them. And of course, it's TED, it's free. So you can hold discussions, you can create interactive quizzes. It has analytics, so you can track how many people have viewed the video and completed assignments. I have a little demo here. This is a lesson on TED Ed, sorry. So the video is called How Tsunamis Work. So you can see here I can watch the video, and I'm not going to play it for you. But under the Think tab, now here I've got some questions. So what exactly is a wave, right? And there's an answer that was in the video, right? And there are 8 questions that my students can answer related to that video, okay? Here's a dig deeper, which is some additional resources to explore. So this is a reading task, also about waves and tidal waves. And then here I've got a discussion question. Why have coastal areas attracted development despite the risks? Do you foresee this changing in? And so I can send my students here. So I can create this on any YouTube video that I can find. And so they have to come here on ed.ted.com in order to do it. So, but it also can be, sorry, not this one. Another one I'm going to show you can be embedded. So if you had your own site, you can embed it. This one I think you have to use here on teded.com, but I thought that was a really great resource. Oh, that's not my PowerPoint. There we go. Another one that I love is Blendspace, or I'm not sure how to pronounce this, T-E-S, teach. So this is a digital lesson, and it'll, basically there's a repository of files, documents, videos, YouTube videos, things that people have put online, and it allows you to search for things based on the topic, and then you can organize it into a lesson. And once you've got your lesson developed, you can publish the link directly to Google Classroom or even embed the lesson into your own site. So I wanted to show you how easy this is. Oh. Let me log in. So I could just go here to create new lesson. And the lesson title is going to be academic session. I can't type in front of people, sorry. And so if I want to do a grammar lesson on past tense, for example, so here I've got French past tense, and you can see that some of them you can pay for and some of them are free. Here, past tense verbs. So I can click on this, and you can see there's several different materials here that I can use. There is a presentation. I click and drag that right there. There's a presentation about the doubling rule of past tense verbs. I'll put that. And then there's an activity worksheet. And there was another worksheet I saw here. Here, irregular past tense verbs. So I can just find these resources that other people have uploaded or just available here, and I can organize it into something that makes sense, and then I can put this into my site or into my Google Classroom, and this would be a great pre-training activity or a great preparation activity. We're going to do something in class tomorrow related to past tense verbs, and so this is how they can build up their background knowledge and make sure they know what's going on with relation to past tense verbs. So I thought this was a great little tool for, I did that in less than 5 minutes because I only have 5 minutes to talk. So it's something that I thought was very easy and simple. So those are just 4 tools that I found that are great for combining and creating blended learning content.
All right, so welcome everyone. My name is George, and Christina asked me to talk about an assessment tool. So I've given an example that I've used in my class. It's a reading and writing class, and the CFR level is A2 to B1. So they're quite comfortable in writing in English, but they haven't mastered lots of vocabulary and grammar to the extent that they need to be perfect in it. What they need to write is a compare and contrast essay. So 4 paragraphs for about 400 words. Now, the way this works is they do draft 1 in class, and they're not allowed to use their phones, which is a major problem where I live because I live in Saudi Arabia. So their phones are like an extension of their hands. So they're already there. So I'm doing a little bit of policing around it. Then Draft 2, they do online, and we're going to talk about this tool, writeandimprove.com. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And then Draft 3, they do a final, which is typed, and they've already had feedback from 3 sources, which we're going to see. Their peers, their teacher, and the online tool. All right, so Write and Improve is a free tool. There's a free version and a paid version, of course, as all products. It's a Cambridge product. There we go. All right. And students can write tasks of topics of different levels. There are some pre-set tasks, but you can set your own task. And they're categorized according to level. They're categorized according to CFR level. There are IELTS tasks. There's different sorts of kinds of tasks that they can do. Now, that's a screenshot of a class. I mean, this is the paid version, but the free version does not differ too much. It just doesn't give you so much. You can create your own class. So on the free version, students can just go do individual tasks, and they can print them out and give them to you. But when it comes to the paid version, you actually create a class. So if you can see on the far right, you have the students' work, and what Write and Improve does is it doesn't, they can type in their essay, and it doesn't actually tell them, it doesn't actually correct their mistakes. It tells them where they need to improve. So if there's a grammar mistake, it will tell them, do you think this grammar is right? Do you think this tense is right? Or if there's a spelling mistake, it will say suspicious word. So it's very suspicious you misspelled that word. Now, if you see those yellow lines, these are fragments or maybe ideas that have not been developed very well. So the machine recognizes that this is not write. So it gives them advice on how to do that. Now on the left part, in the middle I would say, you can see the amount of times that the student has attempted, because they can write a draft and then after the feedback they can recheck it. So for example, this student has done 7 attempts, which is not bad. I mean, I don't ask them for a specific number of checks. They can do as many as they want. Further to that, another part again, that's for the paid version. You can see the number of attempts that the students have done. You see people have done up to 10, maybe, so you can see all your class. You can see other people, the one in the bottom, that he only tried once. Another thing you can do, and this is, I think, one of the most important features of the tool, is you can see their progress. So at the bottom, down here, this is the CFR level. So as I said, like this is an A2 to B1 class. So you can see where students have started and then how they've progressed after several attempts. Now you can see some really good development, like for example, this student, he started from A2 and he's made it close to C1. So that's a huge jump, right? Now we'll tell you how this is done, but I mean, this is something that you can see. And you also have like those students that just submitted once, right here, and that's it. No drafts, no changes, they just brought it to class. So that's something that can help you with your level, just to justify something sometimes that students are to the level. Now, a little bit of, I'll backtrack a little bit. As I said, this is something that's developed by Cambridge. So what Cambridge did is it created the Cambridge English Corpus, which means all the exam material from more than 50 years from all the countries that they've administered any exam, CAT exams, PET exams, FC, CAE, CPE, IELTS, all BEC, all those exams that they've done. They've taken all those and they've put them in a corpus. So what the website does is it takes the student's writing and it compares it to those samples. So you understand that the comparison is huge. So it's billions of writing samples that they've accumulated. And the only thing that, I mean, I found a little bit challenging, and I told you it doesn't correct spelling mistakes, is that most likely no student has, misspelled the word hello with 3 L's and 5 O's, right? So if you put that word in there, it will not catch it because there's no sample of it being, misspelled like that up until now, right? But they found a solution for that. They have the humanitators, which means after your students put in their tasks and after it's being checked, people manually put things into the database, so the database grows and grows and grows. So even now, the hello with the 3 L's and the 5 O's will be considered a mistake on the next attempt. But that, of course, takes time. So it's not that you click it, and then once you submit it, again, it will say this is a mistake. It does take some time. And Cambridge says maybe up to 6 months, because there's hundreds of tasks being submitted per day. And draft is one task. So as many times the student submits a draft, that's a different type of task that a humanitator needs to check. Now, in the blended learning model that I said, the students receive peer and teacher feedback in class. Their mistakes are corrected from both. So first they would do a peer review and then they would come back to me, for example, to the teacher. Then they get constructive feedback from the website. As I said, the website itself does not correct the mistakes, but it gives them feedback on grammar, on fragments, on spelling, on most of it, and on idea development. So that's a very positive thing. And they do submit their writing at least 2 drafts. And the final draft is, the one that they get graded, but their other 2 grades would also count into the final one. That's it.
So basically, what we want to conclude is a few implications, few recommendations, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Basically, in terms of implications, I think you've come to realize that there are many choices out there. So again, as you choose to customize your blended learning environment, you have choices to make in terms of where do you want to take your students in terms of their learning, and how fast do you want them to be able to acquire the knowledge. What kind of resources do you want to include to be able to provide the information that you want them to take away? Thus, the students are expected to be motivated by the blended learning, and they are expected to realize their learning objectives, because you are clarifying them to the students at the start of your courses, or at the start of your day-to-day lessons as you go along. So the recommendations basically are blended learning needs careful planning. Blended learning is very demanding on both the teacher and the student. So the students need to organize courses, select content, consider the students, and make the learning outcomes, of course, measurable. Teachers need to be clear in what students need to do. Teachers need to consider students as responsible players and treat them as responsible players. And teachers need to reflect course realistically before venturing into the whole concept of blended learning. I open it up to the panel. Do you have any last-minute things you would also like to offer based on today's discussion? Anything else? Nope. Okay, so basically we open it up to the floor. If there are any questions, you need to speak into the microphone. I think we're doing great on time.
Anybody have any questions for the panel? Yes.
Thank you all for presenting. This question is directed at Dawn. You mentioned, Dawn, at the end of your presentation, adaptive learning. Sorry. And I wonder if you could just generally comment on your observations and thoughts of where that sort of technology is right now. It seems like a pretty complex enterprise to really get sort of good accuracy with adaptive learning platforms, and we know how diverse student groups and cohorts can be. So if you could just comment a little bit on your observations of how it is today, 2018, and where that might be going.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in adaptive learning, but my interest is because we have been using blended learning models to help students customize their own learning experience, but we have largely simply asked them to do it on their own. And when you ask students just pick the thing that seems right for you, they may pick the right thing and they may pick the wrong thing. So adaptive learning, what I like behind it is this ability to provide the right thing at the right time. However, it is really, from what I can tell, and I just started about a month ago, working with our academic technologies department on our campus. They're really interested in finding a way to make this work for these types of courses. And they agree we can't find anything that is in a more humanities-based or more customized environment in terms of this type of customization. So the adaptive learning that I've come across is, again, where you take a multiple choice quiz or test, some kind of pre-assessment, and then it scores you, okay, it seems like you need this kind of material, you're accelerated, or you need this kind of material, you're remedial. And the types of innovations that are coming within adaptive learning, I just attended the ELI, Educational Learning Institute or something, conference in New Orleans, and they were talking about this, and the types of innovations that are coming are moving that same model and scaling it up so that like a whole curriculum is an adaptive learning curriculum, but it's still that same model where it is multiple choice based. Everything is multiple choice based, and it's intended for large classes to help with large classes in terms of keeping students engaged at a certain level and working at the pace that is appropriate for them. So I have not come across anything that is this idea. So what the vision that I have, what I'd like to see is where there'll be an assessment, which is a writing diagnostic, teachers will obviously need to be involved, and also a self-reflective piece from students so that there is a plan is kind of co-made. Obviously, this is not going to work with super large classes, you know, but I think there are a lot of language classes across the world still are fairly small, and if you can reduce the number, minimize the number of possible options, then I think that becomes more feasible. So over time, if I can get a handle on what is the right number of options and different things like that, so the students feel that is really the thing with writing, you know. If you say to students, we're going to practice writing a summary, once they've done it once, they think, okay, I got this. And then, of course, we all know we need to do these same skills. I mean, we're still doing it, like I said, way, way high up. So this, you know, they need to understand they're not quite there yet, and how do you help them do the stuff that they need to do? Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question.
Are there any more questions? Okay. Oh, wait, we do have a question.
I also think we always need to consider the critical thinking aspect, you know, because why have an active classroom if we're not bringing in the idea of getting students to become critical thinkers? Being able to also look at their learning and measure their own learning, you know.
Thanks so much for all your presentations. It's been very enriching. I work in a system where task-based learning and portfolio-based language assessment have been implemented, and now we're transitioning or hoping to transition to online portfolios, e-portfolios. And I wondered whether you had any, and I'm putting this out to the whole panel, any thoughts on best practices or better practices and tools for online assessment and e-portfolios?
I'll have you know that one of our hot topics next year is to be on portfolios. So,
So one of the programs that we designed is a MOOC. It's 8 courses that leads to a TESOL certificate, and at the end of it, they do a portfolio. And we went back and forth about whether we wanted to ask them all to do like the same platform or what our options were. And because we're dealing with thousands and thousands of students, we decided that to let the students choose the platform that they use, and what they send to us is a link. So we recommend that they look at like how to use Google Sites or Weebly or Wix or, you know, anything, even just a Dropbox folder with the materials in it, but it has to be organized in a certain way, and then they send us a link that goes to that. And that's actually been very beneficial to the students because, number one, they're learning how to use a tool that maybe they haven't used before, but they chose to use that tool. And so it's more motivating for them because we're not telling them they have to use it. And it also it also takes into account their level of expertise. If you're looking for something that's system-wide, one that they use at ASU that's been pretty good is called Digication, and it's I have no idea how much it costs or what's involved with it because I don't administer that, but in my department where we do wholly online classes, that's one of the ones that they use for online portfolios, and they like that one because it's outside of the course platform, so you can take your Digication portfolio with you throughout your online student career, and then you can also share it with you know, employers and other things like that. So.
Any other questions?
Thanks. This question regards the secondary school environment. I'm from Minneapolis, and I, together with, as an ESL teacher, was embedded in the mathematics department of a high school, and we launched a blended, you know, following the recommendations, careful planning, launched a blended learning program, which was ill-received by many students from a cultural standpoint, that it wasn't their idea of what school should be like, that there was no teacher up front, this sage on the stage was suddenly gone, they were fully responsible, they couldn't cheat anymore, on their assessments. And so what recommendations do you have for addressing student resistance? Or have you encountered student resistance at your tertiary undergraduate levels? And how did you deal with that?
I think that would be you. Because it's the setting up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a case no matter where people are from. A lot of it has to do with learning styles as well. One of the reasons we created the blended learning environment for the science students is because they so frequently are in labs, and so their time is spent oftentimes in labs and they can't get out. But even within that environment, we get students who don't necessarily want the blended model. So, I mean, I'll say some things that we've tried, but I can't say it's beyond some things that probably you've tried already. A big part of it is explaining to students the rationale and also providing them, trying to get down to what their concerns are specifically. Is it they don't know how to learn in this space? Is it that what we have found is that types of activities or tasks that might work really well in a classroom don't translate very well to the blended environment. So it feels to them maybe like busy work, or I can't figure this out. I think Justin talked about keeping these really simple. So it might be something about the tasks themselves that students, for whatever reason, it doesn't take long, I think, with any online types of tools to decide that it's kind of, for people to decide they're stupid or useless, and they're like, oh, that's it, I'm done. Like, you get a minimal kind of time frame to figure that out. So having training, ensuring that they feel comfortable doing those things, and the why. I think a lot of times we might assume students want these things when oftentimes they just don't, because it does take extra time, and you do have to remember to go find the stuff, and there's always like something to download, and there's a link that you can never quite find. And so the fewer barriers to those types of minor obstacles, the fewer of those possible, that has helped us. And then discussions on why, and this is why we're designing it in this way. This is allowing you to meet your goals in this way, and that's been the way that we've gotten them to buy into it. And so I guess I would put the question back on you, is why did you design it that way? And if you have legitimate reasons, do the students feel that way too? Are they learning based, focusing on the students? And if that's the case, then you should be able to hopefully bring them into that. If it's really an issue related to teaching is supposed to be somebody up there telling me what to do, then obviously there are a lot of conversations behind that, and it's a lot more than just a blended environment.
Randall, you're going to make, yeah. But I also think it's an issue of making sure that students know how to manage their time. The time management thing also, which goes into the training.
I think another important factor is to keep in mind the less is more principle. I think that many times as we begin to speak about blended learning and technology, sometimes technology is light years ahead of its pedagogically sound use. And so as we begin to think about this, I think there are many teachers, and I'm not suggesting this is the particular case, but many of the teachers that are especially not here feel sometimes marginalized and on the fringes of our profession because they can't see that there's a place for them. So I still believe in using technology, blended learning, and so forth, but also all of that should be driven by the needs that we actually find versus just that the technology exists itself. So just keeping in mind that many people, especially those that are not here, might feel stigmatized because of not using technology, and I think we need to create a very inclusive environment as we proceed forward.
I'll say one other thing. Another thing I thought of that students have complained about with this topic is expressed concerns about, not complained, expressed concerns about on this topic is sometimes, they know when they come to class, like in their minds, that's class time. And if we say, okay, the blended class is the rough same amount of time, you know, but somehow in their mind it feels different. So even though they would know if they came to class, it would be 2 hours on this day. But in their minds, they don't want to spend 2 hours on the computer doing something similar. So even helping them understand that this is not additional work. You are not doing additional work. If you realize it, you are simply, instead of being there, you are doing this over here, and you're supposed to be liking that because it's supposed to be this anytime, any place kind of thing. So I think that the mind, it's a lot of mindsets people are bringing to technology that we have to kind of co-articulate. I mean, somehow come up with some co-guidelines with what they're willing to do. We have policies on how many hours you're supposed to, if it's a certain credit hour, you should spend a certain amount of time in class. So we explain to students, this is just, you know, part of that time lump, and that, even those little explaining those few things helps a lot of students too.
Yeah, I was just thinking that the blended learning, like, you know, change, you know, it's not a conventional thing, so change will bring, you know, resistance, I suppose. So maybe, you know, by explaining, you might need to do a little bit more explanation. And then another thing is that technology or their phones or their laptops or they're not meant for learning for them. They're for fun. You know, they play. So if you can, you know, use, you know, new techniques or gamification in the class as much as you can, of course, maybe that would be a positive thing that you can do to address, you know, certain issues of, you know, just introducing it as a game rather than as learning, homework, and all that.
Kind of what Don mentioned too, going along with training. Students generally don't like blended learning, not in general. There's usually some specific reason. So for example, a lot of teachers will take a course they've taught face-to-face and they just put it online, but they haven't thought through the instructions and how the course is organized and what changes need to be made. And there's a rubric called Quality Matters that goes over a lot of those types of design things, and, you know, clear instructions on how to use the technology, clear navigation in the course, where do they start, what do they do next, those types of things. Often when students get confused, they then just push back, but they won't say I don't like it because I got confused by this. They'll just say I don't like it, or this is a waste of my time generally. So.
Okay, any other questions? Okay.
Sorry, not to hog the air, but my question goes to how lessons are planned and courses are built, specifically in LMSs. I'm wondering if you know better practices in how a curriculum can be interpreted and even facilitated through a front-end tool on an LMS to help construct a course and follow the curriculum, of course.
Well, I know at our institution we use Blackboard, and we have constraints to that because they haven't bought into every aspect. Like, for example, the open classroom. Our institution doesn't allow us to do that. And we've asked why, and I'm like, because we haven't really bought into that part. You know, so again, it comes back to what is your institution allowing you to do with your, but Blackboard would be an ideal place to have a blended learning setup. But again, it comes back to how do you as the instructor want to take in your resource material, plan your activities. What is it that you want your students to do? Do you want discussion board? Like some students of mine don't even want to do the discussion boards because they say if we start the discussion, everybody else copies what we say. And they just reiterate. So what do I do to get the students to start doing that? I give out grades. I say, you know what, I'll give you a bonus in some way. I will, you know, do things just to get the discussions starting up. And I will say, I will also, you know, acknowledge those who are not just copying original, you know, the ideas that have started. Bring in something new. So, you know, you have to work with the type of student you have, the type of environment you're working in, to be able to plan how you want the blended setup to be. That's in my institution. But, you know, yeah.
So If you have a specific LMS that you're being required to use, sometimes you don't, and in that case, then you can look at the features the LMS offers. And for example, with the discussion boards in Canvas, I don't know about in Blackboard, you can require students to post before they can see the responses from other students, so they wouldn't be able to copy. So specific features and things like that that you might know, you can select your LMS based on that, and then generally you would look at what activities your LMS supports, so discussion boards, interactive quizzes, different things like that, and plan out which activities then help you accomplish your learning objectives. So that's one thing, and then organizing the content into into blocks. I design courses on Coursera, and they call them modules or weeks, and so we take groups of topics that go well together, we put them into weeks or into modules, and then with every module there's generally like a general quiz, and we can take quizzes that relate to specific videos and put them directly in the video, so right after it's been mentioned in the video there's like a survey or a question. And so we kind of just plan out what we want the overall course to look like based on that, and then building it is just you're uploading the content and creating the objects inside the LMS. So a lot of it depends on which LMS you're using.
We tend to do that in paper form. We create a syllabus, and then we upload the syllabus and then have it linked into the different components of the LMS. That's what we do. Did it answer your question? Oh.
Maybe I'll.
Okay, you try.
I'm not sure what the question is. I'm not exactly sure which angle you were looking at, but I know when we're looking at a class that we intend to take blended, kind of like what I was talking about, we look at which components of the course lend themselves to the blended environment. So which areas do students need more customization on or something like that, as opposed to so whatever it is about blended learning that appeals to you, which parts of your course lend themselves to that, and then we plan that accordingly, and then we make it clear on the syllabus which days they come to class, which days they don't come to class, what the assignments are. I think we're going to start to include a little bit more about this kind of training idea on how much time it is likely to, will be spent on this activity, to give a little more guidance to that time so it doesn't feel quite so open as well. And then which materials we're going to use. I don't know if that helps anymore. Yeah.
Did it help? Okay. Good. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you for coming and staying, and I hope we were able to address some of the issues that you've been thinking about. And as I said, thank you for coming. And the webcast, the audio and the video, everything's available on the YouTube channel. Thank you. See you next year. We are officially closing up our showcase. Thank you.